Inside Venezuela's deadliest prisons. Starvation, violence, and survival. It was supposed to be the safest place for the convicted, walls meant to protect society, instead trapped inmates in a nightmare of hunger, fear, and bloodshed. Imagine a prison where meals are optional, guards are outnumbered, and every day could be your last. Some survive by forming alliances, others by sheer violence, and many don't survive at all. Inside Venezuela's deadliest prisons, starvation is the new death sentence, and the chaos inside the walls is as merciless as the law outside. The collapse begins. Venezuela's prison system has long been described as fragile, yet nothing could prepare observers for the scale of collapse witnessed over the past decade. Across the country, prisons built for a fraction of the inmates they now hold are operating in conditions reminiscent of wartime crises. Overcrowding, severe underfunding, and rampant corruption have created environments where survival depends not on rehabilitation, but on hunger, alliances, and the ability to fight or flee. According to reports from Amnesty International and Provea, some prisons are holding up to 500% more inmates than their intended capacity. Facilities designed for a few hundred men now house thousands. Cells meant for 4 men often hold 20, sometimes more, with no beds, limited ventilation, and barely enough room to sit. Inmates sleep in shifts, on concrete floors, or simply on the ground, packed tightly like sardines. The psychological toll is immediate, corrosive, and unrelenting. In the remote Andean prison of Los Andes, a facility intended for 300 now confines nearly 1,500. Local NGO reports describe a daily routine dictated entirely by access to food. One detainee, identity protected under a pseudonym, Carlos, explained in an interview. "If you don't eat, you die. It's that simple. You can fight, hide, or pray, but without food, there's nothing." Food shortages are perhaps the deadliest aspect of Venezuela's prison crisis. State funding for meals has been slashed repeatedly, leaving local prison administrations to improvise. Guards often bring supplies only sporadically, and those rations are insufficient for the number of inmates. When deliveries fail, or funds are stolen, a routine occurrence according to court filings, prisoners scavenge. In some facilities, inmates have resorted to collecting scraps from dumpsters or cultivating small plots of moldy vegetables in hidden corners. Starvation fuels desperation, and desperation fuels violence. A 2022 Reuters investigation into Yare prison, one of the most notorious penitentiaries near Caracas, found that fights over food, water, and survival space were escalating into deadly riots. Video footage obtained by journalists shows inmates wielding improvised weapons, often metal rods or sharpened objects fashioned from plastic and glass, as they clash over a single batch of rice or beans. Prison authorities, understaffed and undertrained, are largely powerless to intervene. Violence is not the only consequence. Escape attempts have become commonplace, though few succeed. According to local news reports, a prisoner named Miguel, pseudonym, attempted to tunnel out of a facility in central Venezuela. The effort took months and relied on coordination with other inmates, bribed guards, and a network of contraband tools. His story is a microcosm of the broader reality. When the system fails entirely, ingenuity and brutality become survival strategies. Yet, survival is never guaranteed. Within the walls, hierarchies form quickly. Gang leaders, often controlling access to food and protection, wield more power than prison administrators. El Lobo, a composite pseudonym used to describe one such leader at Yare, oversees a network of enforcers and informants. His influence stretches beyond the prison gates, controlling smuggling routes and maintaining communication with criminal networks outside. Inmates who fail to submit to these power structures face harassment, assault, or death. Psychological strain compounds the physical dangers. Many prisoners report symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and acute anxiety. Cells are isolated, light is minimal, and human contact is often violent rather than supportive. Medical attention is virtually non-existent, with injuries and illnesses frequently untreated for weeks. According to local NGO filings, deaths from malnutrition, untreated disease, and violence have become daily occurrences in multiple facilities. Even the guards operate under extreme stress. With inmate-to-guard ratios sometimes exceeding 50-1, officers cannot adequately enforce rules or prevent bloodshed. Corruption is endemic, bribes for contraband, preferential treatment, or even survival become part of daily operations. Some guards actively participate in rackets, supplying weapons or drugs in exchange for protection money. Others turn a blind eye, allowing inmate leaders to consolidate power and enforce their own brutal codes. Despite the chaos, the human stories remain poignant. Many inmates attempt to preserve dignity and morality in impossible circumstances. Families send parcels with meager food supplies, though these are often stolen or rationed by more powerful prisoners. Educational initiatives or rehabilitative programs exist only sporadically, and their reach is limited to a handful of inmates. For most, the only certainty is uncertainty, and the only guarantee is the threat of death or injury. The rule of hunger and violence. The air inside Venezuela's prisons is thick with tension. Every step echoes against concrete walls, every glance is weighed with suspicion. Hunger isn't just an absence of food, it's a weapon, a motivator, and, often, a death sentence. Inmates learn quickly that survival depends less on following the rules and more on navigating a labyrinth of fear, loyalty, and brutality. In facilities like Yare, Los Andes, and Tocuyito, informal hierarchies have replaced official authority. Prison gangs, often led by the most ruthless and cunning inmates, dictate daily life. These leaders, known locally as prans, control access to food, medicine, and safety. Their word is law. Guards, outnumbered and underpaid, have little choice but to acquiesce. According to Provea reports, these inmate-led structures have transformed prisons into microcosms of the outside criminal world, with their own codes, rules, and punishments. Consider the case of El Tigre, a composite pseudonym representing a notorious Yare prison gang leader. According to local news reports and interviews with former inmates, El Tigre's influence extended far beyond the prison gates. He controlled smuggling routes, dictated who received food parcels, and enforced order with a combination of fear and strategic alliances. Inmates who resisted his authority often disappeared, or were discovered with fatal injuries in their cells. Starvation acts as the central catalyst for this violence. When food deliveries arrive, often days late, insufficient, and of poor quality, tensions spike. Fights erupt over scraps of rice or beans, often escalating into full-scale brawls. Reuters documented multiple incidents in 2021 where a single meal delivery sparked hours-long riots, resulting in dozens of injuries and multiple deaths. Inmates armed themselves with improvised weapons, metal rods, sharpened pipes, and shards of glass, turning common areas into war zones. These violent episodes are rarely isolated. Instead, they ripple through the prison, destabilizing the fragile balance between gangs and authority. For example, in Los Andes prison, a failed food delivery in 2020 led to a 3-day riot. One wing, housing more than 500 inmates, was set ablaze. Court filings and NGO reports confirmed that firefighters were unable to enter for hours, leaving inmates trapped in smoke-filled corridors. When the flames were finally extinguished, at least 7 prisoners had died, many from smoke inhalation rather than direct violence. Amidst this chaos, alliances and betrayals are constant. Prisoners form survival groups to protect themselves, but these alliances are fragile. Trust is a commodity more valuable than gold, yet more fragile than glass. Informants and double agents circulate within these networks, often feeding information to gang leaders or even corrupt guards. One former inmate, speaking under anonymity, described life in the prison as, "You never know who's your friend. Today, someone might watch your back, tomorrow, they could be waiting to take your food, your spot, or your life." The psychological impact of this environment is profound. Inmates live under chronic stress, knowing that any lapse in vigilance could be fatal. PTSD, anxiety, and depression are rampant. In facilities lacking medical staff, mental health issues go untreated, exacerbating violent tendencies. Doctors and NGOs who have gained access describe prisoners exhibiting extreme paranoia, hallucinations, and erratic aggression. In some cases, fights begin for no apparent reason other than fear that someone will strike first. Even beyond interpersonal violence, prisoners face threats from within the system itself. Corrupt guards exploit the chaos, smuggling weapons, drugs, and food in exchange for bribes. These officers often pick favorites, reinforcing gang hierarchies and leaving non-compliant inmates vulnerable. According to reports, guards sometimes deliberately withhold food or protection from certain prisoners to provoke conflict or maintain control indirectly. One particularly harrowing example comes from Tocuyito prison, a facility near Valencia. In early 2022, a food shortage led to an orchestrated attack on a rival gang faction. The attackers, armed with knives and makeshift weapons, struck at dawn, catching their targets while they slept. 7 prisoners died, and dozens were injured. Provea's investigators later reported that the orchestrators of the attack had colluded with certain guards, highlighting how corruption, hunger, and power converge in lethal ways. Survival strategies extend beyond brute force. Some prisoners resort to extreme ingenuity, hiding portions of food, cultivating small gardens in corners of cells, or trading favors with guards for essentials. Yet, even these measures are fraught with danger. Being caught hoarding food or supplies can result in severe punishment, sometimes execution by fellow inmates. The rules are clear: scarcity defines power, and power defines survival. Children are not immune to the system's brutality. In some facilities where juveniles are detained, reports describe younger inmates witnessing, and sometimes participating in, acts of extreme violence. Courts have filed complaints regarding the exposure of minors to unspeakable brutality, raising alarms for international human rights organizations. Amnesty International and UNICEF have both flagged Venezuela's juvenile detention facilities for urgent intervention, citing systemic abuse, neglect, and starvation. Medical crises compound the violence. With limited or no health care available, even minor injuries can become fatal. A broken arm left untreated may become infected. A minor scuffle can escalate into sepsis or permanent disability. In 2021, Reuters reported that at least 15 prisoners died in a single facility due to untreated infections, cases that could have been prevented with basic medical attention. Riots, escapes, and the price of survival. The sirens never stop, though often they are merely symbolic. In Venezuela's prisons, there are no real alarms, no real protection, only chaos waiting to erupt. By the time violence flares, the system is already compromised. And when it does, it moves fast. In Yare prison, the epicenter of Venezuela's correctional collapse, riots have become almost routine. According to a 2021 Reuters investigation, a single fight over a delayed food shipment escalated into a full-blown uprising. Hundreds of inmates seized control of cell blocks, using whatever weapons they could fashion: metal pipes, broken tiles, and improvised knives. Guards barricaded themselves in offices, unable to regain control. Local journalists reported hearing screams echoing across the compound, the sound of concrete striking flesh, and sporadic gunfire from sporadic armed guards. By the time the chaos subsided, 12 inmates were dead and dozens more were injured. Escape attempts are a parallel saga of desperation. Inmates know the odds are low, yet for many, staying inside is more dangerous than risking the outside world. In 2020, reports detailed an audacious tunnel escape at Tocuyito prison. Over several months, inmates secretly dug under the walls, using improvised tools like spoons, metal rods, and even pieces of pipe. Guards were reportedly bribed with small sums of cash and contraband cigarettes to turn a blind eye. On the night of the escape, nearly 24 inmates attempted to flee. According to local news sources, only 5 made it past the outer perimeter. The rest were caught or turned back by fellow prisoners enforcing gang rules. Even failed escapes can have deadly consequences. Retribution is swift. Those who attempt to flee may be beaten, left in solitary confinement for weeks, or worse. Gang leaders enforce these punishments with brutal precision. Survival in such an environment is a complex calculus: risk an escape and face near certain punishment if caught, or endure the constant threat of starvation, violence, and disease inside. Food remains the driving force behind almost every conflict. Inmates who manage to secure extra rations wield disproportionate influence. These food lords, often gang members or enforcers, ration supplies and control who eats and who goes hungry. Reuters and Provea reports describe incidents where even a small portion of rice or beans triggered days of brawls, injuries, and deaths. Hunger doesn't just provoke violence, it dictates the social order. Medical emergencies amplify the stakes. One unverified but widely reported incident at Los Andes prison involved a prisoner collapsing from dehydration and malnutrition. Fellow inmates pleaded with guards to provide aid, but no medical personnel arrived for hours. By the time help came, the prisoner was dead. Such cases are not isolated. Amnesty International has repeatedly highlighted the intersection of neglect and violence as a leading cause of death in Venezuelan prisons. Despite the dangers, human ingenuity persists. Some prisoners establish networks of barter and protection. Scarce food is traded for favors, information, or protection. Small gardens flourish in hidden corners, despite the risk of discovery and violent retaliation. Prisoners craft rudimentary stoves, purify water from contaminated sources, and devise warning systems to avoid attacks. Survival becomes a game of constant vigilance, improvisation, and alliances. Yet, the violence is indiscriminate. Even those who attempt to remain neutral, prisoners who neither challenge the gangs nor involve themselves in conflicts, can fall victim. A dispute over territory, a mistaken identity, or the whims of a gang leader can seal a prisoner's fate. Court filings and NGO reports note that many victims are individuals who simply lack the physical strength or social connections to protect themselves. Outside interventions are limited and often ineffective. The Venezuelan government has struggled to regain control of these facilities. Military and police operations occasionally sweep through prisons, but they rarely last. Provea reports describe instances where security forces retreated within days, leaving the prisons in the hands of inmate hierarchies once again. International human rights organizations have condemned the systemic neglect, but practical enforcement is almost impossible without significant political and logistical commitment. Individual stories illuminate the human toll. One former inmate, using the pseudonym Jorge, described surviving on 3 small meals a week, relying on gang protection, and witnessing multiple murders in his wing. He explained, "Every day is a negotiation for your life. You trade your safety for food, for favors, for anything that might keep you alive. And even then, it's never enough." Riots, escapes, and gang-enforced hierarchies are not abstract phenomena, they are the lived reality of thousands. In some facilities, inmates report that there is a constant rotation of violence. One day a riot erupts, the next a guard is bribed, and later a failed escape leads to retaliatory attacks. Life is a continuous cycle of tension, danger, and uncertainty. Collapse, accountability, and the human cost. By the time you step inside a Venezuelan prison, the walls are more than concrete, they are monuments to systemic failure. The collapse is not sudden. It is the slow, grinding consequence of decades of underfunding, corruption, and neglect. By 2025, prisons like Yare, Los Andes, Tocuyito, and Urabana have become emblematic of a national crisis that extends far beyond the gates. Overcrowding, starvation, and violence are not isolated incidents, they are routine. Reports from Amnesty International and local NGO Provea show that the combination of insufficient resources, gang-dominated hierarchies, and inadequate staffing has created an environment where death is as predictable as sunrise. Starvation remains a silent executioner. One former inmate, speaking under the pseudonym Luis, described surviving on scraps of food for months. You get used to the hunger. Your stomach hurts, your body weakens. But your mind can't stop calculating. Every bite, every sip of water, every moment outside a gang leader's reach, everything becomes life or death. The Venezuelan government has made sporadic attempts to regain control. Military and police operations sweep into prisons to quell riots or break up gangs. Yet these interventions often fail. In 2022, a coordinated operation at Los Andes temporarily restored order, but within weeks, the prison hierarchy had re-established itself, and violence resumed. Court filings indicate that systemic corruption allows bribes, contraband smuggling, and selective enforcement to undermine every top-down effort. International organizations have repeatedly sounded alarms. Reports from Amnesty International, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and Human Rights Watch condemn the Venezuelan prison system as a site of gross human rights violations. Starvation, torture, neglect, and extrajudicial killings are prevalent, yet enforcement and accountability remain minimal. External aid often struggles to reach prisoners due to bureaucratic restrictions and political resistance. One particularly devastating example comes from Urabana prison in 2021. Provea reports documented a riot sparked by a failed food delivery. Inmates armed with makeshift weapons attacked rival factions. Fire engulfed sections of the facility, trapping hundreds inside. At least 20 prisoners died, dozens more were injured, and local authorities struggled for hours to regain control. Investigators later found that corrupt guards had deliberately withheld intervention, allowing the chaos to escalate. Beyond statistics, the human cost is profound. Families send letters and parcels that may never reach their loved ones. Prisoners' physical and mental health deteriorates daily. Survivors often carry lifelong trauma, scars from violence, and the psychological burden of witnessing atrocities. Those released from these facilities frequently struggle to reintegrate into society, marked by violence, distrust, and the indelible memory of survival under impossible conditions. Yet even in the bleakest circumstances, stories of resilience emerge. Some inmates organize themselves to ensure weaker prisoners survive, forming informal support networks, sharing scarce resources, or providing emotional care. Religious groups and NGOs occasionally establish educational programs, offering a rare glimpse of hope amidst despair. These moments highlight the human capacity for courage and solidarity, even in environments designed to strip people of both. The systemic failures are not merely administrative, they are moral. When a prison becomes a battleground for survival rather than a place of rehabilitation, society itself bears the cost. Venezuelan prisons have become microcosms of a nation in crisis, underfunded, overwhelmed, and struggling to maintain the social contract. The international community continues to pressure the government to reform, yet real change remains slow, sporadic, and uncertain. Chapter 4 closes with a sobering truth: Venezuela's prisons are a stark reminder that when institutions collapse, the human cost is immeasurable. Hunger, violence, and corruption are not abstract statistics, they are lived experiences of thousands of men trapped within walls meant to protect society. Every death, every riot, every act of survival tells the story of a system pushed beyond repair, and of humanity persisting, in small but vital ways, against overwhelming odds. As the gates slam shut at night, and the cries echo through the concrete corridors, one reality remains unyielding: in these prisons, survival is not guaranteed, it is earned, moment by moment, in a world where the rules of justice have been replaced by the rules of survival. As the sun sets over Venezuela's cities, its prisons grow darker, not just in light, but in consequence. The concrete walls, once intended to confine crime and restore order, now enclose a different reality, a world where survival outweighs justice, where hunger dictates behavior, and where fear is the currency of life. These walls have seen it all. Riots ignited by scarcity, violence fueled by desperation, escape attempts that end in tragedy, and the slow erosion of humanity under impossible conditions. Every cell block tells a story of endurance, brutality, and the fragile human spirit struggling against forces far greater than any individual. It is easy to view these prisons as isolated incidents, a problem contained behind thick walls. But the truth is far more unsettling. The conditions inside reflect the broader collapse of societal structures, governance failing, oversight weakened, and institutions left to decay. And in this decay, the consequences extend beyond the prisoners themselves. Families suffer in silence, communities tremble at the news of another riot, and the nation grapples with the stark reality that its system of justice has fractured. Survival within these walls is no simple feat. Inmates learn to navigate a complex web of power, gang hierarchies, corrupt guards, and the constant threat of violence. Hunger is omnipresent, shaping decisions and alliances. Simple acts, sharing a meal, tending a hidden garden, warning a fellow prisoner of danger, become profound exercises in morality and ingenuity. These small gestures, fleeting and fragile, are acts of rebellion against a system that seeks only to strip humanity away. Yet even amid brutality, there is a thread of resilience. Many prisoners, despite the omnipresent threat of violence, maintain a sense of community. They create informal networks to protect the weak, preserve fragments of culture and knowledge, and hold on to hope, however faint, that life beyond the walls may one day offer something different. This persistence is a testament to human spirit. Even when surrounded by fear, starvation, and death, individuals find ways to assert their dignity, to hold onto identity, and to act with courage. But the larger picture remains grim. Systemic corruption, underfunding, and mismanagement continue to fuel a cycle that seems almost impossible to break. International organizations issue warnings, governments make promises, and human rights advocates fight tirelessly, but on the ground, inside the prison walls, change is slow and sporadic. Death, injury, and psychological trauma remain constant companions for inmates. It is impossible to fully comprehend the scale of suffering unless one has walked the corridors of these prisons, seen the overcrowded cells, smelled the desperation, and witnessed the fragility of life in a place where hope is in short supply. The stories are not just about crime, they are about human beings caught in a system that has failed them utterly. Men who were convicted of offenses small and large are now subjected to punishments far beyond their original sentences. Starvation, fear, and violence have become the new verdict. And yet, for all the darkness, there is a warning, a lesson, and a call to action. The prisons of Venezuela are not just isolated tragedies, they are cautionary tales about the consequences of neglecting the most basic human needs in any society. They remind us that justice is not only about punishment, but about protection, fairness, and humanity. When institutions fail, the human cost is immeasurable. And when individuals are forced to survive under conditions of starvation, extreme violence, and constant fear, society as a whole bears the consequences. As we leave these walls behind, the echoes remain. The sounds of desperation, resilience, and struggle linger in the imagination. They are reminders that each statistic represents a life, each riot a story of despair, and each act of survival a testament to human ingenuity. For the families waiting outside, for the nations observing from afar, and for the prisoners themselves, the reality is clear: the walls that were meant to protect society now contain the consequences of its failure. So what can we take from this? Perhaps it is this: humanity cannot be confined or erased, even in the harshest of circumstances. Even in prisons where survival is uncertain, dignity and morality find a way to persist. The system may fail, resources may be scarce, and violence may reign, but the human spirit endures. It endures in the quiet acts of kindness, in the courage of those who protect the weak, and in the determination of those who refuse to surrender to fear. As the night falls over Venezuela's prisons, the struggle continues. Inside, men calculate, plan, and fight for each moment. Outside, the world watches, often helpless, sometimes horrified, always reminded of the stakes. This is a place where life is fragile, justice is fragile, and hope is fragile, but where resilience, courage, and the will to survive are remarkably unbreakable. In the end, these prisons are more than just facilities, they are mirrors. They reflect what happens when a society neglects its most vulnerable, when justice is reduced to walls and bars, and when survival is dictated by fear and hunger rather than law and ethics. And in these reflections, we are challenged to see the value of human life, the cost of systemic failure, and the indomitable spirit that persists, even when everything else has collapsed. The walls may contain the bodies, the violence, and the hunger. But they cannot contain the human spirit. And as long as people remember, document, and bear witness to these realities, hope, however fragile, still exists.